wow. So this is what the office of the company of the greatest writer in the world looks like. How lucky of me to get the opportunity to possibly work for such an illustrious potentate of the writing arts. Hello, my name is Stumpy Bergenpine, and I'm here for the interview. That moan sounds familiar. Have we met at a networking event or something? Maybe the Los Angeles Porn Convention? No. ZombieCon? Oh, the DMV. Oh, maybe. Oh no, it was. Were you the guy that I hit? He was riding the scooter, and I ran him over with my car, and I had to go because I had a coffee, and it was traffic, and I was running late, and all that kind of stuff. Was that you? No, that must have been somebody else. Wait, huh? Which way is it? This way? Oh. Oh, thanks a bunch. Thank you. Wow, it's dark in here. Moody. Hello?
Please take a seat.
But I don't see a seat anywhere. Oh, wow. It's coming out of the floor. Neat.
Take a seat.
Well, let me start off by saying that I feel like I am a very strong candidate for this.
Silence. You think you're good enough to be my assistant? We shall see.
What's this?
It's a story, one of my stories. As my assistant, one of your chief duties will be to read my own stories to me. They are the only kind of stories I like, but I detest reading, for I consider it a menial task, and that is why I need a menial.
Me?
Meal, yes. Your job interview is this. Read the story to me, and if you do a good job, and we have a nice discussion about the themes, and other writing themes, of which I'm very acquainted, then I might possibly be hiring you.
Listen, I really need this job.
I know. I can taste your desperation in the air.
Hold on. This seems familiar.
It isn't.
Okay. What's this about anyways?
This story is about the scariest holiday of all time.
President's Day. Finnegan Stapler admired the golden double doors that stood before him. His eyes traced the lines of its morbid frescoes like a lover's tongue, the supple curves of the bones and gravestones, the elegant roundness of the presidential seal, the chilling texture of the golden skulls. This, he uttered reverently, turning to the crowd of old people behind him, is the most sacred navel of our patriotic Smithsonian tour. You, every member of the legislative branch of our republic, are here on the most fitting day for the grand opening of something for which the presidents of old have waited centuries. The presidential necropolis. A fat U.S. senator in an ill-fitting suit raised her hand, and Finnegan lazily pointed at her. "What's a necropolis?" Alaska Senator Charity Dogood asked. "A city of the dead," Finnegan said. In 2045, President Alberto Mendez signed the Presidents in One Place Act, creating the presidential necropolis in perpetuity. One of the most popular presidential decrees in the history of our beloved republic, the Presidents in One Place Act ensures that all of you, he gestured to the crowd of senators and congresspeople in front of him, can witness each presidential skeleton or executive decaying body as part of your standard Smithsonian tour, free of charge, for all time. Senator Dogood cocked her head in baffled confusion. "I'm sorry, I just vote on so many different things, in one ear, out the other, as they say." A corn-fed grandpa in the front raised a diabetic finger. "What about the curse?" Missouri Representative Chuck Gutstrings articulated. "There's no curse, so stop talking about it," Finnegan said. Gutstrings balked at such a stark chastisement from someone who, in a different setting, he would have considered a menial, but the authority of tour guides weighed him into a heavy silence. Finnegan pushed open the golden doors. They swung easily, bathing the tourists in a wash of sanitized air. They all filed in, name-brand camera phones at the ready to snap precious memories. Finnegan was set to follow when his name-brand smartwatch beeped. Confused, he glanced down to see a message from his husband, Esteban. "Happy President's Day to the man who never votes. Have a nice day at work." I hate voting. I hate these presidents, and I especially hate their stupid President's Day, Finnegan muttered in response. None of the tourists heard him as they filed past into the Stygian depths of that dread executive tomb. Finnegan checked his smartwatch. 8 a.m. Hours to go. He sighed and closed the golden doors as he followed his charges into the crypt. The sky blue light of name-brand smartphone screens cast a deathly pallor about the sepulchre as tourists used their night mode cameras to capture images of the modest, upright sarcophagus of President Alberta Mendez, recently deceased. A relief of her in the cross-armed pose of a pharaoh graved the lid, eagle in one hand, tickets to the presidential tombs in the other, a fitting tribute to her mediocre regime. The senators and representatives oohed and awed at the presidential display. President Mendez, Finnegan intoned. He'd been instructed by his supervisor to be dirgeful in his recitation of the tour copy, an act he was more than suitably prepared for due to his loathing of his job. The genius behind the presidential necropolis. May she reign here in peace for 4 more years, and then 4 years beyond that, for all time. He bowed his head slightly. Some of the officials behind him bowed their heads too, and muttered, 4 more years, like a benediction. Frescoes covered the wall, showing George Washington, 100 feet tall, pointing toward a bright horizon, a shining city on the hill, that being the United States of America. Beneath that, interactive learning centers beeped and booped, their digital chirps setting a lure for those with hungry minds. A tremendous ding rang through the space, as if 1,000 phones received the same notification at the exact same moment. Cameras turned off, investment apps opened, and Finnegan's ears were assaulted with the cicada-like click of thousands of fingers typing furiously. "What the heck?" he asked. "Insider trading," said Representative Gutstrings, not even looking up from his phone, as if admitting to SEC violations was the most normal thing in the world. 1 second and 1,000 phones dinged as one, once again. Trade complete. Some of the junior congressmen even high-fived one another, pumped their fists, and cheered. "Okay," Gutstrings said, looking up from his phone. "What were you saying?" At a momentary loss for words, Finnegan could only stare at the corrupt officials before him. Fortunately, his momentary muteness was obfuscated by a sound coming from behind him. The sound of stone scraping on stone. The gluttonous chatter of well-fed senators died away, replaced gradually by the nervous chitter of representatives on the edge. "What was that?" Gutstrings asked, his voice awash with a coward's timber. "It might just be the building settling," Senator Allspice Rosethorn of Delaware posited. "Or the presidential curse," someone muttered from the back. "The curse," Duguid scoffed. "That's just an old wives' tale that poor people tell themselves to feel less poor." "What's the curse?" someone shrieked from the rear. The scraping sound resumed. "They say that when he died," Gutstrings intoned over the terrible stony racket, "our beloved forefather George Washington laid a curse over this beautiful land we call the United States of America. He looked Thomas Jefferson in the eye and he said, 'One day, when corruption and tyranny reign over the land, when the government's greed outweighs its duty to the people, the presidents will return to enact my terrible vengeance.' No one really believes." His eyes caught something behind Finnegan as he trailed off, face paling by the second. The stink of rot suffused the stone room. The scraping was intolerably loud, and it was coming from behind Finnegan. He spun around, just in time to see the lid slide off of Mendez's sarcophagus, and to see the recently dead president rise from her resting place, eyes glowing an unearthly shade of red, white, and blue. Mendez stumbled forward on presidential legs, shaky from decay. Her executive suit, once so crisp and clean, now showed signs of tatter. Holes in her clothing revealed graveworms and grubs squirming and palpitating from her embalmed flesh. Many slid from her corpse and plopped onto the stone floor. Madam President," Gutstrings blubbered, fear lighting his greedy eyes with a porcine sheen. We thought you were dead. We had a state ceremony and everything. They're building a library for you in your honor. Yet you live?" An unhinged smile crept across Mendez's face.
"I'm not alive,"
she hissed, her voice grating like the opening of a tomb.
"Yet I crave life."
A great rumble came from the entrance to that dreaded final resting place of presidents. As one, Finnegan and the vast majority of the United States government spun around to witness a slab of granite slowly closing over the golden doors, their only obvious method of egress. "She's trying to trap us!" a panicked voice shrieked from the crowd. Politicians ran for the locked door just as they had run for office so many times before, in an effort to scramble beneath the giant slab of rock as it descended. Fights broke out. The weaker folks, the elderly and infirm, fell to the floor, screaming as the stampede of their duly elected coworkers mashed them into congressional paste. "No!" Finnegan shouted, his tour guide instincts taking over. "Please form an orderly line if you want to escape from this tomb." His words went unheeded. Politicians dove into the golden doors, cracking their heads against that heaviest of metals and forcing them ajar. Bloody and dazed, they crawled through the crack as the granite slab fell ever lower like a slow-motion guillotine. Only a few, the first to sacrifice their bodies to force the doors open, made it out. The rest weren't fast enough. Their shouts turned to screams as the mighty stone obliterated them like ants being crushed beneath a particularly large shoe. Finnegan covered his eyes, but it wasn't enough, for you could still hear the horrific squishing sounds over the omnipresent rumble of the stone lowering like Damocles' sword, finally free from its bindings. The most crimson of liquid, that being blood, flowed across the floor like campaign contributions in a successful senatorial re-election campaign. The granite slab settled onto the equally granite floor with the clang of a funeral bell. For a nonce, silence was the only sound. This silence was broken by the horrible din of someone choking. Finnegan turned back around to see Mendez strangling gut strings. The representative's face was red, like a legislative strawberry, as the delicate bones in his neck cracked. It only took a moment longer for the top of his head to pop open like a pimple, spraying a cadre of aides with blood, brain matter, and little chunks of skull. Mendez looked up from her kill to grin at the rest of the humans. Gore dripped down her dead face like icing dripping down the side of a trendy cake. "Die!" she hissed. It was as if a congressional dam was holding back the true panic among the legislators, and, with the zombie president's evil command, that congressional dam broke. Finnegan watched in minimum-waged horror as the United States government shrieked and stampeded every which way. Mendez waded into their midst, grasping senators and representatives alike, using her unholy strength to burst their brain pans like a tot discovering bubble wrap. Finnegan's 2 hours of tour guide training were inadequate to handle such a catastrophe, but he was a man of action. What would his beloved Esteban say if he stood by and did nothing? Determined that this would be his finest hour, he raised his hand. "Tour group, to me!" he bellowed. "Form on me! The golden doors are shut to us, but there is a way, a darker way, by which we can escape." "Where?" Charity Dogood howled, stepping aside to dodge a soaring meniscus. "Where is that exit? As your duly elected senator, I command you to tell us." Finnegan turned and pointed into a hallway, pointing deeper into shadow and death. "There," he uttered. "If we cannot go out of the tomb, then we must go through." They abandoned most of the aides and interns to the former president's undead hunger, hoping that what they lacked in usefulness and experience, they would make up for in body count and sheer gory mass. Finnegan led the way. It was a difficult group to corral, but his authority as a 2-hour trained tour guide held most of the troublemakers in check. It was a good thing, too. The tour group's discipline had gotten them past Lincoln, the Bushes, and Martin Van Buren with minimal casualties. It seemed the older presidents, still animated, though more decayed, were slower than the freshly dead Mendez, and thus easier to avoid. In another stroke of luck, whatever trap Mendez activated in sealing off the golden doors had also sealed many of the exhibit's side passages, protecting the humans from the vast majority of the presidential horde. Finnegan could hear them banging on the heavy stone as the group trod past, and he breathed a sigh of relief, for he was certain none of them could face the gigantic Ohioan corpse of William Howard Taft. Before long, they had made it through the majority of the exhibit. Finnegan thought it all a bit of a shame. So much work was done on the frescoes and the dioramas, on the interactive media centers and presidential learning games, but they were unable to experience any of it. Perhaps, once this curse was lifted, he could take Esteban on a private tour. There was a certain peace to it, if the dead stayed dead. Finnegan signaled a stop with a raised fist. Dogood scurried up next to him. "What is it?" she asked. "Up ahead," Finnegan whispered. "The Cold Warriors exhibit." He pointed to a marbled archway that depicted a bald eagle and a hammer and sickle opposing one another. "Are we almost out?" Dogood asked. "Just this and the Founders," Finnegan confirmed. Dogood gave him a shove. "Let's go," she urged. "You don't get it," Finnegan said. "According to the history books, the Cold War presidents are some of the most cunning, ruthless presidents to ever president. They set a precedent for shadowy presidenting." "So what?" "So I'm worried about a trap," Finnegan said. Dogood put on her executive face, a screwed-up, constipated look of a below-average intellect arriving at a critical decision. "That's it," she said. "As a duly elected member of the government, I'm letting you go and I'm assuming the role of tour guide." Inconceivable!" Finnegan sputtered in apoplectic confusion. "I'm the tour guide now," she shrieked, raising a hand into the air. "Senators and representatives, follow me, Senator Charity Dogood. I will lead us out of this mess." An expert on messaging, Dogood's words hit the mark. The group began to shuffle forward. "No, don't!" Finnegan shouted. "Can't you see? She's leading you into a trap." No one listened. Fearing being left behind for the dead ancient presidents to catch up and slowly tear him apart, Finnegan had no choice but to follow into the tomb of the Cold Warriors. An omnipresent hum greeted him as he stood before the threshold, as if the world's largest air conditioner was struggling to keep the massive, dark chamber beyond at a deathly chill. His teeth chattered as he uttered, "This is a bad idea." Dogood had led the remaining members of the U.S. federal government onto the cold ice of this arena-like room, where they huddled close together for warmth. She looked around, her expression showing not a single crack, apart from in her eyes, which were wide with worry. "Where to now?" someone whispered. "Are we trapped?" hissed a second. "How do we get out?" chattered a third. "Tour boy!" Dogood shouted at Finnegan as she turned to face his shivering form. "Which way?" Finnegan pointed behind her, his arm bobbing up and down in uncontrolled... What was it? Cold? Terror? "Yonder," he said. "And through." "Through what?" Dogood asked, her exasperation as acidic as an acid-dipped knife. Finnegan took a step back in delicious terror. "Through... them." Dogood spun around like a name-brand child's toy to see the shambling corpses of Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, and Reagan barring the outlet. They wore pristine 1980s Winter Olympics U.S. men's hockey team uniforms, skates included, and carried sharp-looking hockey sticks. Dead eyes stared at her from behind hockey helmets. Dogood took an involuntary step back, almost slipping on the icy floor. JFK set a puck on the ice, then raised his stick, pointing it at the senators and representatives. "Ask not what your country can do for you," he uttered. "Ask what you can do for your country." Dogood grabbed the nearest representative, a slight woman with a perm, and shoved her forward. The woman struggled for balance as she slid and managed to stop herself when she was standing toe-to-toe with the puck. JFK's cold eyes stared daggers into her heart. "What can I do for my country?" she asked. JFK slammed his stick down. The sharpened end split the puck in two with an almighty crack. "Die," undead JFK told her. He swung the stick heavenward, splitting the woman cleanly in two. Then the presidents attacked, sliding forth on their skates with the ease of swans. Johnson, cumbersome in his goalie getup, smashed into a gaggle of terrified representatives, his stick swinging wildly. Limbs and heads soared into the air, trailing delicious blood like party streamers behind them. Ford held Junior Senator Quagmire Quiverton by the arms as Nixon wielded the presidential switchblade. "I'm not a crook," Nixon growled, jowls shaking. "I'm not a crook. I'm not a crook. I'm not a crook." Finnegan backed away from the melee, petrified eyeballs scanning this way and that, searching for the telltale red glow of an exit sign. The violence had befuddled him. He was lost and couldn't find his way out. Carter and Eisenhower had a score of surviving aides cornered. The aides trembled as the two presidents closed in. Blood was plentiful on the ice, and the dead president's skates cut neat swirls through the red puddles as they advanced. An intern tried to make a break for it, but Eisenhower cut him down faster than an eagle killing a groundhog. The two presidents chuckled darkly. Suddenly, a figure slid between the presidents and aides, kicking up a shower of ice as it came to a stop. "We're saved!" an aide proclaimed. "We're..." She trailed off in horror as the figure slowly turned, revealing his Ronald face and his Reagan's eyes, narrowed in presidential malice. "Fucked." The aide's face fell like an egg dropping to the floor. "The most terrifying words in the English language are," Reagan said, stabbing forward with his stick, impaling the aide on its terrible point. "I'm from the government, and I'm here to help." He pulled a knife out of his hockey pants and went to town, cutting the aide like a fish from the briny sea. Finnegan tore his eyes away and at last spotted the exit sign. "This way!" he shrieked. "Run for your lives!" He, along with an ever-thinning gaggle of senators and representatives, slipped and slid across the icy floor, making their way toward a dark cyclopean edifice. As they passed under it, Finnegan read the words carved into its stony face. The Founders. Dark stone gave way to shining white marble that reminded Finnegan of the beloved monuments on the National Mall. The room was vast, impossibly so, and the floor stretched off into shadows in every direction but one. Ahead of the group, now numbering only 37, rose a height of marble stairs, which themselves vanished into shadows. Their eminence filled Finnegan with patriotic terror.
To her boy!
Duguid hissed through her serpentine teeth.
Where's the exit?
A trembling hand was raised, and it belonged to Finnegan. "Upward," he intoned.
"And beyond? Beyond what?"
Fires ignited at the top of the presidential ziggurat, revealing a burning brazier made of purest gold, the most American of all metals, and thrones a short distance behind. 5 of them topped the ziggurat, 4 facing each other in groups of 2, lining a crimson carpet that led to the largest and mightiest of the thrones. Skeletons occupied them all. As one, they turned to gaze their sightless eye sockets upon the interlopers, and a cool chill blew through the tomb, carrying with it the patriotic scent of death. Adams, Monroe, Madison, Jefferson, and... Finnegan wiped a tear of ambrosial terror from his cheek. Washington.
Washington? Where?
Duguid asked, excited despite all of the horror her eyes had digested this day.
On the largest throne? Cloaked in shadow, Finnegan whimpered. We must pass through, Senator, for the exit is behind him.
Duguid took a mere moment to process this before her executive powers took over.
Right, she said. Everyone who works in the House is in front, junior senators after that, and the leadership will take up the rear.
The government grumbled but did as instructed. Finnegan fiddled with his fingers, bundle of nerves.
Where should...
he began before Duguid cut him off. You're our tour guide, she said, an evil smile on her face. She gestured to the front of the line. So guide. She shoved him. Her arms, made strong by years of passing bills, threw him forward with great force, so that the young man found himself standing at the ziggurat's base. He glanced over his shoulder, where elected representatives glared at him. This was it. He had no choice. He ascended the stairs. Torches mounted on the steps sprung to life as he passed them. He heard the clatter of expensive leather shoes behind. The government was following.
This government,
a disembodied voice boomed as the mortals climbed,
is for the people, yet it stinks of greed and corruption. Stinks more than a presidential corpse.
The senators and representatives murmured in confused fright.
While in life, the presidents may have struggled with their own avarice, may have feuded and fought, may have been divided, may have lied and cheated. In death we are as one, pure.
Finnegan was at the top of the stairs now. The 4 founders he could see stared at him, their skulls shiny and clean of flesh, clean of sin.
In death, we see the folly of life.
The voice, which Finnegan now recognized as belonging to the most holy of founders, George Washington himself, monologued.
For in life we want, and wanting is the root of all evil. But in death we want not.
Finnegan felt the eyes of Adams, Monroe, Madison, and Jefferson judge him as he passed. His footfalls, once quiet, now seemed to pound off the marble, the echoes cascading into an infinite shadow of darkest midnight. He made it to the mightiest throne. A skeleton sat there, older than the rest, its skull still shrouded in penumbrum. Finnegan bowed his head and genuflected. It felt like something one should do when facing the founding father. A rattle of bones, like demented wind chimes, caused him to spin around. The senators and representatives were now standing between the 4 founders. Jefferson and Adams blocked their way forward. Monroe and Madison blocked the way back. Each held a cavalry saber in their skeletal hands.
Therefore,
Washington proclaimed,
the only way to fix the government is to kill it. One nation, under God, ruled by the dead.
The founders advanced on the mortal government, who screeched. Evil words creaked out of Washington's mouth.
Happy President's Day.
Sabers rose and fell. Elected officials died by the flash of the blade. Their screams were burned into Finnegan's mind, a sound that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. When the slaughter was done, the presidents turned to look at Finnegan, who took an involuntary step back. He bumped into Washington's throne, which was strangely empty. I'm not a senator, he sputtered. I'm just a humble tour guide. I'm just a normal person. I have no power. Something flickered to life behind him. Finnegan peeked around the mighty throne and saw an exit sign glowing red in the darkness. He stepped forward, 1 step, then 2, then another until he was speed walking, almost there when a bony hand grabbed his shoulder with undead strength.
Tell me,
Washington hissed, in a voice like the grave.
when was the last time you voted?
Finnegan trembled in American terror. Something spun him around, and the last thing he saw were wooden teeth, filed into points, surging toward his throat.
Well, what did you make of it? Out with it, boy. Speak.
I'd like to call it a macabre tapestry woven with threads of political satire and morbid fascination. The author's dexterity in imbuing each presidential revenant with a distinct semblance of their historical persona is nothing short of virtuosic. From the spectral machinations of Mendez's zombified visage to the malevolent specter of Nixon's cunning duplicity, each phantasmal incarnation serves as a ghastly reflection of their mortal legacies, haunting the reader's imagination long after the final page is turned. Yet, it is in the juxtaposition of the supernatural and the political where the true brilliance of this literary tour de force reveals itself. Through the lens of the uncanny, the author deftly exposes the systemic rot and moral decay festering within the corridors of power itself. How was that?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I intended as tour de force, you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, okay.
Did I get the job?
Does a tree kill in the woods?
Tree who? What? It's... my head. Oh, God. That maniac had me in a dungeon, and that story, that god-awful story. Oh, and then the ghouls. The ghouls and the chains and...
Go on.
Who are you? Turn your chair around, sir. I demand it.
You fool! You fell for my job application ruse like all of the rest.
But I escaped you a year ago. I moved to a new city. I made new friends. I found love. I got married. I had kids.
All ghouls playing their parts, I'm afraid, and playing them well. You see, you never escaped my dungeon. You've been here the whole time.
The walls are pulling away. My God, that's all set dressing. In a soundstage. This was all a ruse? Why? Damn it, why?
Because it's funny. This episode was performed by Nick Cedar and Lord Serpent. It was edited by Charles Brock and Lord Serpent. President's Day was written by Charles Brock and Lord Serpent. It was produced by Stacy Milbourne, Michael Morgan, Charles Brock, and Lord Serpent. Michael Morgan and Lord Serpent were the audio engineers. The music was composed by Charles Brock and Lord Serpent. Be sure to vote this November if you're in the United States, or else the evil zombie presidents will get you. Also, be sure to listen to another tale of horrific, monstrous terror next week. Oh, and I almost forgot. I allowed Nick Cedar to write a wonderful little story for unlike-minded podcast called Beyond Landscaping. It's amazing what one can imagine locked up in a dungeon. Be sure to give it a listen. Or else. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Lord Serpent's Library, and check out my homepage at rss.com/podcasts/Lord Serpent's Library.